fantasy football picks will bust in 2024. What's going on, football fans and fantasy freaks? It's Mitch back here with another fantasy football advice video. And in this video, the players you must avoid this fantasy season. The players that, based on their average draft position, will bust, will disappoint. And you just don't want to draft these guys, okay? So with that being said, don't forget to Gronk spike the like button and subscribe to OwnersBox Fantasy for more fantasy football content just like this. Also, hop in the comments and let me know your opinion. Let me know which player you're avoiding, you don't want to draft in 2024. Let's begin the list of players I'm avoiding, and I'm telling you, don't draft this guy in 2024. And we're going to begin with a controversial take at the quarterback position. Avoid Lamar Jackson, the NFL MVP. That's right. I'm telling you, out of the elite tier, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson, I'm not drafting Lamar Jackson, because if I'm drafting a quarterback high in my fantasy leagues, I'm rather grabbing Allen, maybe Hurts or Mahomes, and then I'm waiting. That's my opinion. And my opinion is based on the fact that Lamar Jackson just won a Most Valuable Player award, and he finished as the QB4 in fantasy football. How often do we see that? When Lamar won his MVP in 2019, he was the QB1. And that was because he was running the ball more, he was scoring more touchdowns. Last year, he didn't really do that well, statistically speaking. It was more about the team and them winning games, and he was really productive and efficient, but he wasn't like blowing away everybody in fantasy football. And I think it could be worse this year for him because the O-line is worse. 3 starters from last year are now gone. I personally believe that Derrick Henry is going to vulture a lot of rushing work, specifically in the red zone. And I think because Lamar is becoming more of a pass-oriented player, that's actually hurting him for fantasy purposes. So I think you should avoid the MVP. I know that's crazy to say, but that's just my opinion. The second quarterback that I think you should avoid, the bust of 2024, Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott was second in MVP votes in 2023. And he had his best fantasy season of his career, his best production of his career. He led the NFL in passing touchdowns. Don't expect that 2 years in a row. First of all, you have the offensive line. Tyron Smith, his left tackle, his protector, his man is gone. Tyler Biadasz at center, also gone. So the offensive line is a little bit more flimsy and unreliable. We don't know what to expect there. Secondly, Tony Pollard is gone at running back. I do think that the defense overall is about the same level. I do feel, most importantly, that Mike McCarthy, as an offensive coach and a schemer, he just isn't great. So last year's production, when you're not in a phenomenal top-tier system with a great play caller, it's hard to replicate because a lot of it came down to CeeDee Lamb individual performance. What if Brandon Cooks is banged up and not playing, consistently? What if things happen to CeeDee Lamb with his contract? There's a lot of things that could happen here, and Dak just not being able to replicate that individual performance where he was uplifting the rest of the offense through his arm and his ability to scramble and extend plays and make magic happen. That's really what worked for Dallas last year. It wasn't this amazing scheme. So that's what I'm worried about. He's currently being drafted as QB8, and I'd just rather take Stroud, Burrow, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy in that range, maybe even Caleb Williams in that range over Dak Prescott. Yes, Dallas could have a really good offense, but I do expect to step back this year, and that's why I'm fading Dak Prescott. My third bust of 2024 at the quarterback position is rookie quarterback of the Commanders, Jaden Daniels. First of all, I was not a Jaden Daniels fan coming out in the draft. I wanted the Patriots to land Drake May. I'm a Patriots fan. I wanted them to land Drake May and not Jaden Daniels. So that's first and foremost. My evaluation of Jaden Daniels was not like others. I did not see him as an elite prospect. So that's first. But more importantly, yes, he is a good runner of the football, but I don't really believe in his situation. I think the offensive line is still very much below average. It's not one of the better units in the league. That's for a fact. The running game is pretty underwhelming. Austin Eckler can't run. Brian Robinson is replacement level. He's solid, but nothing special. He will see a lot of work for fantasy purposes, but as a real-life product that's going to help his quarterback, it's not like it's Barry Sanders, okay? Then at wide receiver, they really only have Terry McLaurin, who is reliable. They're even questioning Jahan Dotson to a pretty high degree there, and their tight ends are rather a rookie in Sanat or a very, very old and run-down Zach Ertz. So I just don't see how Jaden Daniels is going to thrive in year one. It's a bad team. Cliff Kingsbury is not Kyle Shanahan. He's okay. Honestly, like, I question him in Arizona at times with Kyler Murray. I think he's a bigger name and is given more credit than he really deserves. I didn't think he did a great job with Caleb Williams at USC last year, and yet he still landed this job. So for me, Jaden Daniels isn't a void. He's going to have some appeal because he's a good runner, but I'm telling you, I'd rather draft somebody more reliable in this spot, or somebody like Caleb, who's probably a better prospect. He's got a better offense, a better situation. Go with that instead of Jaden Daniels. Moving to the tight end position, I'm going to begin with Travis Kelce as a bust for 2024. And this is not like a severe bust. Drafting Travis Kelce is not going to absolutely destroy your season. But I do believe that him being drafted as tight end 1 in a lot of home leagues where people know him, and of course they're very familiar with Travis Kelce, the Chiefs, Taylor Swift, all that stuff, the whole narrative, people are going to overdraft him. So in a lot of casual leagues, especially, Travis Kelce is going to be completely overdrafted. He's older. He is getting a little bit slower, a little bit less explosive, especially after the catch. And going in that range of the draft, I'd just rather have even Sam Laporta, a second-year tight end who's on the incline, who is about to break out in a big way. I'd rather wait a little bit and grab Trey McBride or grab somebody like Dalton Kincaid rather than taking Travis Kelce so high in my drafts. And on top of that, this is a guy that they're going to save for the playoffs. Like, they're not going to work Travis Kelce to the bone in the regular season. This is a team that's trying to three-peat. They brought in alternative options at receiver to throw the ball to get the ball to for Mahomes to work with. They don't care about the regular season. As long as they win 11 games, 12 games, they'll make the playoffs. They're not going to work Kelce. If this was playoff fantasy, I'd be into Travis Kelce, but not regular season. He's not really going to care about putting up 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns again. It doesn't matter to him. He's Travis Kelce. So I would just avoid him in fantasy, to be honest, at the range that you have to afford him early in the draft. Mark Andrews is another target to avoid, another guy that I think will bust in 2024. Mark Andrews is tight end 3 right now, but he has not had a great season in multiple years. He's been banged up, he's been injured, and now that Zay Flowers has arrived on the scene in Baltimore and Derrick Henry has been signed at running back, Mark Andrews just feels like a way less appealing option considering his age, his injury history, and the competition that now exists. Because I believe Zay Flowers is about to break out in a big way, and I don't fully believe that Lamar is going to be an MVP caliber player this year, as I just suggested, somebody has to take a hit. And I think that's going to be Mark Andrews, not only because I don't think he's going to stay healthy the entire year, which is going to be frustrating, but also because I think the target in the offense is going to be Zay Flowers. I think the go-to guy, the guy that's racking up receptions, I think Mark Andrews is going to be more of a big play, red zone target, more of like kind of George Kittle-esque, where Kittle's being drafted as like tight end 7 or 8, where he's a big play, boomer bust tight end on a weekly basis because he's very good, but he's supported by a lot of other talents around him, which in fantasy is not appealing. Mark Andrews, I could see having a similar season when he's on the field. I just don't like the vibes of him coming into the season. I'd rather draft somebody younger like Trey McBride, like Dalton Kincaid. So I'm just at this point in his career, I just don't feel like Mark Andrews is worth the draft capital. And then my final bust at tight end is Evan Ingram, who's being drafted as tight end 8. He did lead all tight ends last year in receptions, but I think that a lot of people are going to overdraft him because of that fact, especially in PPR leagues. But the fact is that Christian Kirk was injured last year, and they didn't have Brian Thomas Jr. Yes, they had Calvin Ridley, but I believe that Evan Ingram moves from being the engine of the offense, the go-to guy in the offense, to being like the number 2 or the number 3 option in the offense. So especially with Christian Kirk, being that both those guys are basically slot receivers, they're fighting over the same targets, the same middle of the field action, the same concepts, the same Doug Peterson drawing this play up for Kirk or Ingram instead of just Ingram for an entire season. So I think he'll be overdrafted because of that fact. He'll still be fine, I think, but I don't think he'll be anywhere near the high-end production he saw last year. On top of that, I'd just rather draft a more explosive weekly option like David Njoku, or somebody that I think's in the higher pecking order of his offense like Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. So Ingram, I just think's a little bit overdrafted. Moving to the running back position, my bust of 2024, Alvin Kamara is my first bust of 2024. I think that Alvin Kamara at RB16, he's just my flat out easiest pick. He's not even the guy going the highest. We're going to get to those guys in a second here, but he's the easiest pick. Like, I have not drafted Alvin Kamara once in best ball, in fantasy at all this offseason. I'm just avoiding him. The offensive line is terrible on paper. They don't really know who the left tackle is yet. The right tackle is already kind of injured in Ryan Ramczyk. Derek Carr, the new offensive coordinator, like Kamara is getting less efficient as his age continues to get towards the 30s, and he's just not a great rusher. He catches a lot of passes, like short passes, but other than that, man, like other than the floor of a PPR league that he does maybe have as an RB2 because he's going to catch 60, 70 passes, he's just not going to put up a lot of touchdowns. He's not going to be rushing for a lot of yards. He's going to be frustratingly lacking efficiency. And I just don't think the Saints are going to be a very good team. I'd rather draft Kenneth Walker, who's young, on the rise, could see a 3-down type of role. I'd rather draft James Conner a little bit later, who's in a better, more electrifying offense, who has similar capabilities but is way more efficient and is probably going to be better in the games that he actually suits up in. So Kamara, to me, feels like a guy you could probably start on a weekly basis. He's just going to not have a very high ceiling. He's going to have a floor, but not a very high ceiling. So that is the easiest bust in the entire video. Next, I think Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins, who's being drafted higher than Alvin Kamara at running back 11, is definitely in a void for me. And I think he will bust because of the competition that he has in the backfield in Wright and in Mostert. And the fact that last year, I think a lot of people are not really looking deeper at what he did when he was on the field. So he had a stretch of 51 points, 27 points, 21.5 points in a 3-week span, right? But then he had 5 weeks under 15 points at the end of the season. And I think that was because he was in and out of the lineup with injury. And I don't think Mike McDaniel trusts him as his lead back or the guy that's going to get the most touches. So for him to be drafted in best ball at like RB 6 or 7 or 8 in the second round, and for him to be drafted even at RB 11 in home leagues, I think that's way too high when you could get guys with way better work rate, way more carries, way more touches, like James Cook, who's very efficient, but way more touches. Kyron Williams, who led the NFL in rushing yards per game last year, way more touches. He's the workhorse of his offense. Travis Etienne, way more touches, the workhorse of his offense. All these guys are going rather just slightly above, depending on the platform, in Williams, or just below in Cook or Etienne. So to me, like, I just think Mostert is still a big thing. He ran for over 20 touchdowns last year. They drafted Wright for a reason. This is going to be a rotation of running backs. I'm just avoiding this whole situation, especially considering that the offensive line is not very good at all. It's one of the worst on paper in 2024. So I just don't want anything to do with this Miami backfield this year, honestly. Like, a lot of people are going to get really excited to draft A-Shane. I just think it's going to be a headache for most of the season, especially considering his injury history. Then we have Derrick Henry as my final running back bust. And Derrick Henry has already been brought up in this video multiple times. I expect him to be a bust only because he's a huge name. He's a Hall of Fame running back. He's an all-time great. But each and every season, I kind of avoid Derrick Henry because unless he puts up 2,000 rushing yards, 1,700 rushing yards, double-digit touchdowns, all that stuff, I think he could be valuable in standard formats or even half PPR formats. But in the majority of my leagues, I play in PPR, and he's being drafted as running back 8. He finished as running back 16 last year. Like, I think he's a solid RB2 in fantasy. I don't think he's catching the ball very much. Even the Ravens said that Justice Hill is basically like splitting carries and work with Derrick Henry in terms of snaps because Justice Hill catches the ball. He's the third down back. He's a good route runner. Like, he'll be in the 2-minute situations. Unless the Ravens are always leading games and Henry's just pounding away 20-plus carries a game, he's probably not going to be worth the pick that you have to take him at. Like, he's a late second rounder, mid-second rounder at this point, and it's just not worth it to me when you could pick a number one receiver in his offense, or you could pick another running back a little bit later that has pass catching chops, or a running back in that range like Kyren Williams, who to me could like lead the league in rushing yards. So I feel like Henry, given his age, switching teams, the philosophy of what they want to be on offense, more pass heavy than in recent years, it just doesn't really feel like he's worth where he is going, despite the name value and maybe the sexiness of Derrick Henry being with Lamar Jackson. So I would fade and avoid the bust of Derrick Henry. Finishing with the wide receiver position, and I wanted to finish with this position in this video because I have the most guys to fade and the most players at this position that I feel will bust, because you have to start 3 or 4 receivers most often in fantasy football. So there's going to be quite a few guys that you should be avoiding. The one early in drafts that I think you should avoid is Chris Olave. And it's not because of volume, it's really because of ceiling. And it's also because of situation. So I've already brought up the Saints in Alvin Kamara because of the offensive line. I think that's really going to hinder their downfield passing attack. I think that's also going to hinder Derek Carr's production. There's already been rumblings of Spencer Rattler getting on the field at some point this year if the Saints struggle, and that very well could happen, which is also going to hurt Chris Olave. I would say that Olave, most importantly for a guy that you have to draft in the second round, he just doesn't have enough boom games. He only had 2 20-point games in his entire season last year. I'd rather take a chance on somebody like Nico Collins, who's attached to CJ Stroud, an awesome offense, an awesome team. He had a better season last year, and he's going later than Chris Olave. Cooper Kupp, who, if he is right and healthy, and he's going much later than Chris Olave, he could lead the league in receptions. Like, he could be a total league winner. So just where you have to pick him, he just feels like too much of a floor pick and not enough of a ceiling pick at wide receiver 11 in drafts. Then you have Stefon Diggs, who's going as wide receiver 19. And I brought up Nico Collins as a target. I like Tank Dell as a player. Stefon Diggs is, in my opinion, the number 3 receiver in Houston. And he's not being drafted like that. He's wide receiver 19, who's suggesting he's at least a wide receiver 2. When you look at last season, he had 6 out of his final 8 games being under 10 fantasy points. And in the range that he's being picked, it's an absolutely disgusting decision to go with Stefon Diggs. He is being drafted ahead of Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Devontae Smith. Rather, the number 1 in DJ Moore, DK Metcalf in great receiver trios, or like a strong 2 in Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle in good offenses. Like, Diggs isn't a good offense, but he's the new guy on the block. He is getting older. He did show regression with Josh Allen last year. So all the signs point to him just taking a step back and being not as fantasy viable as past season. Keenan Allen is another guy in a really tough situation to produce for fantasy. Wide receiver 30, he's currently being drafted. I have barely drafted Keenan Allen. I understand it in PPR leagues because he has become a slot target volume monster, but that was with Justin Herbert and Phillip Rivers, right? This is a new connection he has to build with a rookie quarterback in Caleb Williams, who already is like best buddies with Rome Odunze, his fellow first round pick, and DJ Moore is the dude in Chicago in his prime that's always going to be on the field. Keenan Allen is likely only going to be on the field in 11 personnel sets, which Chicago is not going to run a lot of. They're going to be like 11 personnel and 12 personnel quite a bit because Shane Waldron loves having multiple tight ends in his offense, being involved when you look at his Seattle days. So I just feel like his snaps are going to be cut down. The amount of targets because of the competition is going to be cut down. Remember, Allen had an amazing season last year when Mike Williams was injured. So he was clearly the first asset, the first go-to guy for Herbert in a lot of situations where they were trailing in games. I think he already came to camp, of course, coming back from injury. He's old. He's in his 30s, early 30s, and he's overweight. He came to camp overweight. So there's just so many things I don't like about his situation. I've been avoiding Keenan Allen for years, but I feel like 2024 is probably the year, most importantly, given all those factors. Christian Kirk is another receiver to avoid at wide receiver 31, who's going right alongside Keenan Allen. These guys are being drafted ahead of Chris Godwin, who's the clear number 2 and probably the number 1 in terms of targets and receptions in his offense. Calvin Ridley, the clear number 1 in Tennessee. Terry McLaurin, the clear number 1 in Washington. Keenan Allen and Christian Kirk are like the number... Kirk, you could argue, is the number 1. Allen is, to me, the number 3 in his offense. Christian Kirk, you could argue, is the number 1, but here's the thing. He is a specific role only, and that's slot receiver. So I think he has a solid floor to a certain degree, but at the same time, like, him and Evan Ingram are going to be eating into each other's targets. Brian Thomas is going to be the outside perimeter target, right? They brought in Gabe Davis to run outside perimeter routes. Christian Kirk's coming back from an ACL injury. Travis Etienne catches the football. There's a lot of targets, on this offense, kind of a deceptively loaded receiver room. And Kirk, being that he's coming back from injury, being that he's probably going to have to split slot snaps with Evan Ingram, and he had some shaky overall, just when you look at, 12 personnel, it's probably going to be Davis and Thomas. And then 11 personnel is probably going to be Kirk in the slot. But I just feel like it's, in comparison to Chris Godwin, who I know is always going to be on the field and is going to be in the slot, or Rashee Rice, who's the number 1 target for Patrick Mahomes, or Calvin Ridley, who's going to be moved around like Jamar Chase, according to his coach. There's just so much better options in that range, which is why I'm avoiding Christian Kirk. And then my final wide receiver bust is Hollywood Brown of the Kansas City Chiefs, taken at wide receiver 38. I'd rather draft Christian Watson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, young receivers with a lot of upside. Hollywood Brown feels like a guy that you like the appeal because he's had some pass production. He's never played with a quarterback quite like Mahomes, but he's going to be competing with Xavier Worthy for that vertical slot role, and it feels like Kelce and Rashee Rice are the number 1 and number 2 options. So he's probably like the number 3 at best in this offense, in my opinion, and he's already dealing with injuries. Just too fragile to take a chance on. I'd rather go with a young guy with upside at that spot. So those are my busts of 2024 in fantasy football. Let me know yours in the comment section below. It's Mitch. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to OwnersBox Fantasy for more.